Ford has just reported $5 billion in electric vehicle losses in a single year. At a company that was supposed to be leading America's electric future. This is Ford, a brand that survived the Great Depression, 2 World Wars, and the 2008 financial collapse. A brand that put America on wheels for 120 years. But today, the strategy that was supposed to save the company is the thing that is breaking it. How did this happen? How did one of the most iconic automotive brands in history end up losing everything on the future it bet on? The peak that hid the problem. To understand where Ford is today, you have to go back to what Ford was. For most of its 120-year history, Ford was not just a car company. It was an American institution. The Model T democratized mobility for an entire country. The Mustang defined a generation. The F-Series has been the best-selling vehicle in the United States for 47 consecutive years. Not the best-selling truck, the best-selling vehicle. Every single year since 1977, more Americans have bought a Ford F-Series than any other product on wheels. By 2021, CEO Jim Farley was projecting the kind of confidence that makes investors lean forward. Ford was not going to follow the electric revolution. Ford was going to lead it. The company announced $50 billion in electric vehicle investment through 2026. Wall Street applauded. Ford's stock climbed. The strategy seemed airtight. Ford had the brand. Ford had the manufacturing scale. Ford had the dealer network. All it needed to do was electrify what it already knew how to build. That assumption turned out to be wrong in almost every way that mattered. The decision that changed everything. In 2021, Ford split the company into 2 separate business units. Ford Blue would handle combustion, the F-150, the Bronco, the Mustang. Ford Model E would handle everything electric. 2 sets of financials reported separately so investors could see exactly where money was being made and where it was being destroyed. It seemed like a transparency play. It turned out to be the moment Ford accidentally showed everyone exactly how bad things were. In 2022, Ford Model E lost $2.1 billion. In 2023, the loss grew to $4.7 billion. In 2024, it ballooned to $5 billion more. That is nearly $12 billion in electric vehicle losses across 3 years. Ford's entire market capitalization as of early 2025 sits at roughly $45 billion. The company has incinerated more than a quarter of its own market value, chasing a transition it has not figured out how to execute. And through all of it, Farley kept promising investors the electric business would reach profitability by 2026. That target has now been quietly removed from every public communication. No new date has replaced it. The goal simply disappeared. The way things do when the people responsible would rather not talk about them. The lightning that never struck. The centerpiece of Ford's electric strategy was the F-150 Lightning. Take the best-selling vehicle in America, electrify it, and own the market before any competitor could respond. Ford took 200,000 reservations in the first 10 days. The hype was enormous. And then everything began to fall apart. Production delays pushed the launch back repeatedly. When the Lightning finally reached customers, battery fires followed. Then software failures. Then recalls for loose fasteners that could cause wheels to detach at highway speed. Ford issued recall after recall before the truck had completed a single full year on the market. The sales numbers told the rest of the story. Ford had projected 150,000 Lightning sales annually by 2023. The actual 2024 figure came in at roughly 13,000 units. Not 130,000. 13,000. Ford had aimed for the sky and landed in a field it could barely see from the launch site. Ford responded by cutting production targets multiple times and quietly laying off workers at the Rouge Electric Vehicle Center in Michigan, the factory that Farley had personally toured with President Biden at its ceremonial opening. The layoffs appeared in earnings footnotes. No press conference. No acknowledgement. just numbers adjusted downward. The Mustang Mach-E was bleeding money in a way that defies explanation. When Tesla slashed its prices in 2023, Ford panicked and cut the Mach-E's price twice, dropping it by up to $8,000 per vehicle. Each cut destroyed the economics of every unit sold. By late 2023, Ford was losing an estimated $60,000 on every single Mach-E it delivered. Not $6,000. $60,000 per vehicle. Ford was essentially writing a check to every customer who bought one. The Rivian gamble that blew up. In 2019, Ford placed a $500 million BET on Rivian, the electric startup promising to reinvent the truck. By 2021, when Rivian went public at nearly $100 billion, Ford's stake was worth close to $10 billion on paper. Inside Ford, it looked like genius. Then Rivian collapsed. Production problems, cash burn, and the electric vehicle market correction wiped out the paper gains almost entirely. Ford sold down its stake progressively, locking in losses on what had briefly looked like a historic win. But the money was never the most damaging part. Ford had invested in a competitor rather than building electric vehicle capability in-house. When the partnership fell apart, Ford was left without the technology it had been counting on, and without the internal expertise it should have spent years developing. The shortcut led nowhere. The problem. Nobody wanted to say out loud. The electric crisis was not the whole story. Because while Model E was hemorrhaging billions, the traditional business was developing a problem that Farley eventually felt compelled to confess on a live earnings call. Ford's warranty costs had become one of the most alarming numbers in the automotive industry. In 2023, Ford spent $7.1 billion on warranty claims, repairs, and replacements for vehicles that left the factory broken. That figure represented roughly 5% of total revenue spent fixing products that should not have needed fixing. Toyota runs warranty costs at less than half that rate. On a 2023 earnings call, Farley described the quality situation as unacceptable and admitted poor quality was costing Ford $1 to $2 billion per year in entirely avoidable expenses. A CEO of a global manufacturer publicly admitting on a recorded call that his company was wasting $2 billion a year cleaning up its own mistakes. That kind of honesty is rare. The situation that produces it is rarer still. Ford issued more vehicle recalls in the United States in 2023 than any other manufacturer. Not per vehicle sold. Total recalls. More than any other brand on the market. That is not bad luck. That is a manufacturing culture that has lost control of its own output. China. The market Ford already surrendered. While the rest of the world watched Mercedes and Porsche slowly lose their grip on China, Ford had already lost it. Quietly. Years earlier. At its peak in 2016, Ford sold nearly 1.3 million vehicles in China. By 2024, that number had collapsed to approximately 400,000, a decline of more than 70% over 8 years. Chinese manufacturers, BYD, NIO, and a generation of startups, built vehicles with better software, longer range, and more advanced technology at prices that made Ford look expensive and obsolete. Ford's joint venture partners sent the warnings. The feedback reached headquarters. Nothing changed fast enough to matter. Ford's response was retreat disguised as pivot. The company shifted focus toward commercial vehicles in China rather than competing in the mainstream market where local brands had already won. For a company burning $5 billion a year on electric vehicles in North America, the loss of China is not a footnote. It is a structural hole that makes every other problem harder to solve. The one thing still holding everything together. One division stands apart from everything else. Ford Pro, the commercial vehicle business, is the only part of Ford working exactly as intended. Ford Pro covers transit vans, Super Duty trucks, and fleet services sold to governments, businesses and contractors. In 2024, Ford Pro generated an operating profit of approximately $9 billion, with margins approaching 15%. But Ford Pro's $9 billion in profit is immediately spoken for. It funds the $5 billion in electric losses, covers the $7 billion in warranty costs, and keeps the dividend flowing to shareholders who would otherwise be asking much harder questions. It is not building a future. It is paying for the mistakes of the present. And then there is the F-Series. The F-150 and Super Duty variants generate an estimated $50 billion in annual revenue, with per-unit margins between $10,000 and $15,000. Without the F-Series, there is no electric investment. There is no warranty budget. There is no Ford as currently structured. One product line is carrying a $45 billion company on its back. The tariff crisis that arrived at the worst possible moment. In 2025, as if everything else were not enough, the ground shifted under Ford's most profitable products. The Trump administration introduced tariffs of 25% on imported vehicles and components. Ford sources critical parts from Mexico and Canada under agreements built over decades. Overnight, those agreements became substantially more expensive. Ford estimated the impact at $1.5 billion in additional costs for 2025 alone. What happened next was extraordinary. Ford temporarily suspended its full-year financial guidance, the earnings forecast every investor uses to evaluate whether the company is on track. Ford told the market it simply could not predict its own profitability. Farley described the situation publicly as a race. The electric business needs to become profitable before the combustion business runs out of room to absorb the losses. The tariffs arrived at precisely the moment that race had become tightest. Electric losses, warranty costs, China gone, tariffs arriving, all at once. What comes next? Ford is not going bankrupt. The F-Series and Ford Pro generate enough cash to keep the company solvent through almost any short-term crisis. But solvency and health are different things, and the distance between them is where Ford currently lives. In early 2026, Ford announced another reorganization, scaling back consumer electric vehicle investment and pivoting toward commercial electric vehicles, where losses are slightly less catastrophic. The next-generation electric F-150 platform has been delayed. The long-term future of the Mach-E remains unconfirmed. It was not described as a retreat. It was described as a strategic focus. But the math underneath was identical to what Porsche announced when it quietly abandoned its 80% electric target. A plan that was failing, replaced by a smaller ambition with no firm timeline. The warranty crisis has no quick fix. The China volume is not returning. The tariff pressure will not disappear. What remains is a company with genuine historical greatness being managed through a transformation that is costing more than expected, taking longer than projected, and producing losses that require a new explanation every 90 days. The question is not whether Ford survives. The F-Series makes that nearly certain. The question is what Ford looks like when this is over. A leaner company that quietly stepped back from its global ambitions, or a company that somehow cracked the electric economics, fixed the quality, and came out the other side. Right now, the first outcome looks far more likely than the second, and almost nobody is talking about it.